We're going to start this with a video tonight. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
I was 13. I was coming from Van Buren Public Schools, Belleville, that is. It was a time in my life I was getting in trouble in school a lot. I was getting suspended a lot and calls home a lot. I ended 7th grade early, if you know what I'm saying. They told me to go home and to not come back. So when I started 8th grade, I was on thin ice. I was in art class, we had a substitute teacher. You know how kids are. When the substitute is there, they think they can do what they want. Everyone is loud, talking and playing. A pencil got thrown at the teacher, and they called the counselor down. They tried to get a couple witnesses. A couple people said I didn't do it, but this one female said that I did. I always felt like Belleville people didn't like me because of who I was, not because of race. They looked at me like I was some type of troublemaker. Sometimes it was for things I did, and sometimes it was for things that they thought I did. In this instance, I did not throw that pencil, but I got expelled anyway for 180 days. Like I said, I was on thin ice. I moved in with my grandmother. My mom had asked my grandma for help because she was having a hard time getting me back in school. My grandma would make work for me. She'd make me read, do multiplication, or I had chores. But there was no school. There are no schools for expelled middle schoolers around here.
All right.
Hello.
I'll pass it over to Pristine.
Yes. Thank you. As y'all can hear Squan's story, that was a very, very tough expulsion for an accusation of throwing a pencil. But as you know, expelled students are having a hard time getting back into schools. We always experience students having a lack of support while on expulsion too. And, support like SAC can help change that direction out of school students as well. We're going to go to the next slide. I just wanted to get more insight of his story too, and how expulsion, hinders a lot of students for their on their education. And on this side, it has data of pre-pandemic expulsions and post-pandemic expulsions as well. And as you can see, pre-pandemic expulsions declined as zero tolerance was reversed. Post-pandemic expulsion numbers went right back up, and its numbers are still rising as we speak. Students that need the most support are being pushed out and expelled and suspended on high numbers of rates. We can go to the next slide. We know many other students, and it's just quick facts. We know that many other students are being put into virtual discipline, placement, and inadequate supports or opinions, no data. Black boys and girls, students with disability, and students experience foster care and homelessness are disciplined at higher rates. The data shows you that it hurts schools, students, parents, and communities because students are being pushed into the justice system, which results in increasing taxes for everyone. Thank you for your time.
So we're looking at the big picture tonight. Hello, by the way, my name is Casey Stratton. I'm the Youth and Young Adult Advocate at Michigan Disability Rights Coalition. And so I have a lens on students with disabilities who are in the juvenile justice system and the foster care system, but we know that it starts at school, which is why I'm part of this group and this team of people. But we know the system was designed for adults. The system of discipline in schools was designed for adults to feel better, not for the student to have their needs met. It's a very short-sighted system in most schools. It's all about compliance in that moment and not considering the damage in the long run. It deteriorates your relationship with a student when you force compliance. And the efforts to gain compliance are often very punitive. Behaviorism was put together in the 1950s based on experiments that were done on dogs and rats in the late 1800s. So there's some backstory there. It's outdated science. The science does not show that compliance is the solution for behavior. It's a missed opportunity to help kids develop. It takes away intrinsic motivation. Again, it hurts relationships, and it focuses all on like progress and regulation. And what I always like to say is that when we look at a kid, we want to remember, or anyone, that behavior is communication. So a student is telling us that some of their needs are being unmet, which is resulting in them having very large emotions. And so if we focus on the emotion and what's happening inside that child, it's a better strategy for discipline, or even not even the word discipline, it's just a better strategy for an intervention with a student than just forcing compliance or being punitive or suspending and expelling. We can go to the next slide, please, Drew. So unfortunately, seclusion and restraint, even though Michigan passed laws to say it can only be used in emergency situations, the numbers are still rising. And Michigan's numbers are higher than the national numbers. But in the national US, we know that 77% of kids that are secluded at school, which means being put into a room that's locked, are children with disabilities. It's not a good strategy. The science doesn't back it up at all. Think about if it was you and you had a little outburst at work and they locked you in a closet for an hour. I don't think that that would help you or help you regulate your emotions in any way. And so when we see students appear calm when we're putting them in these situations, we're actually seeing their nervous systems are shutting down. They're not actually calm. It's a trauma response, and it hurts. It's hurtful to everyone. When we restrain children, and there's a thing called mechanical restraints, and that's when kids are taped to a chair or tied to a chair, or have their hands tied together like handcuffs, basically. That's very harmful. And even physical restraint with our hands and arms. Like I've seen kids get held down at a school. I've seen it multiple times, and it's hurtful to everyone. It's traumatic for the kid. It's traumatic for all the other kids. It's traumatic for the staff and for the teachers, and even for the school resource officers, if that's the person who's doing this with kids. So we work very hard. Cassie will be talking about it too in her slides coming up, to try to stop this practice in schools. And there have been districts that have done really good things around behavior and not using seclusion and restraint, and the numbers speak for themselves. It's much better in those situations for those kids. So if you want to go to the next slide, Drew. So here we have what's called the discipline trauma cycle. So children that have been traumatized may not feel safe, and they may enter a hypervigilant state. This can lead to distress behaviors when the youth becomes overwhelmed or triggered. When demands are placed on that individual that they are unable to meet, the situation often escalates. And that can lead to the fight, flight, or freeze behavior, which may lead to punishment and re-traumatization. So we see here this wheel of discipline. You have the punishment that leads to trauma, that leads to changes in the brain, hypervigilance, distress behavior, compliance demands, escalation, fight, flight, or freeze, punishment again, and the cycle continues. So I'm always looking for solutions that can de-escalate, that can help young people regulate their emotions. Oftentimes the strategy is to let everybody calm down, including the adult, and then have the conversation about what happened instead of giving discipline in that exact moment, so that everyone has a minute to regulate ourselves. When we are in fight, flight, or freeze mode, we cannot use our cognitive front part of our brain that makes decisions. So that's why we see sometimes behaviors escalate, because the youth is so overwhelmed that they literally cannot use their brain in the normal way. So I'll say, let's take 10 minutes, let's find a quiet space, and then I'm going to circle back with you, and I'm going to talk to you about what happened. And I also usually with kids will say, what do you think the consequence should be? Because we know that feelings happen, but that doesn't mean there are no consequences for feelings. And often the student will come back to me with something that's way worse than anything I was going to give as a consequence. So that it builds the relationship when you sit down and have that empathetic conversation. And in the long run, the kids know that you care about them. So even if you have to give them consequences, they know it's coming from a place of caring. And so the long-term relationship can be very, very positive. When I used to work for the Boys and Girls Clubs of Grand Rapids, and the teens would just find me anywhere they could to tell me all their drama or to tell me a problem they were having, because they knew that I cared about them. And other adults would come in the room and be like, I cannot believe that teenagers are so nice to you. I'm like, it's because they've known me for years and we've built this relationship and they know that I care about them. It's really that simple. And also for the adult practices, when teachers or staff or after school program staff, when they learn to do things differently, it's better for them too. Everybody wins when you take alternative approaches to discipline. So thank you very much for your time, and I'll pass it over to Cassie now.
Hey everybody, I'm Cassie Atella. I'm here from MSAR, which is Michigan Advocates to End Seclusion and Restraint. And I want to tell you about my son's experience. When he was in kindergarten and first grade, he spent a lot of time in what was called the time away room. And before I had seen this room and I asked about it, they told me it was a sensory room where he could go to calm down. And so I'm picturing sensory swings, pillows, soft music, low lighting, beanbag chairs. Well, one day when I went to pick up my 6-year-old first grader, I was handed a Meyer bag with wet clothes in it. And I was told by the parapro that my son spent some time in the time away room and he had an accident, which was really surprising to me because he had been potty trained since before preschool. Well, at the debriefing meeting the next day, I was told that he asked to go to the bathroom, but he wasn't calm enough. And so they denied him access to the bathroom. So he was forced to urinate on himself by caregivers at school. And these were well-meaning adults. They really believed that he was purposely doing these things. He was purposely, fighting, and he was laughing, he was having fun, and they believed he could calm down if he wanted to. And that's why they didn't let him go. Months later, they had trouble getting him to the office when I came to pick him up. And so I got to see the actual time away room. And there was a room off of the hallway. It was an office. And then inside the office, there was a closet-sized room that was about 3 feet wide, about 4 to 6 feet long. And it was just that painted cinder block walls. It had hard industrial carpet, bright fluorescent lighting, absolutely nothing in it for him to calm himself. But there was a door and a small window, a thin window that was covered on the outside with paper. So he couldn't see out, but the adults could see in. No one in their right mind would call that a calming environment. And he was there over 100 times between the fall and Christmas of his first grade year. This is a form of solitary confinement. And there's lots of research for incarcerated population about how solitary confinement increases mental health issues, deteriorates relationships, and increases aggression, paranoia, and suicide. These are traumatizing experiences that make school miserable for these children. And this is their only school experience. These are mostly very young kids. Usually it's highest in elementary schools. It deprives students of co-regulation and caring connection when they're their most vulnerable, in the moments they need it the most. And you might think, given all this information, that seclusion and restraint are very rare in Michigan, only used when necessary, as Michigan law requires, only as a last resort when less restrictive options were tried and failed, and where there's imminent risk to the safety of the student or others. And you can go ahead and change the slide, Drew. But the reality is that we're up well over 20,000 times a year just in the state of Michigan. 93% of these are on students with disabilities, which make up 14% of the population. And this is severely underreported. My son's school never reported a single one of his. They reported 0 every year he was there. There's no state level oversight at all, no auditing of the numbers. There's no corrective action for schools whose numbers are extremely high, or if they're using seclusion and restraint and reporting 0, as my son's school did. You can go ahead and advance the next slide. And you can see this is from this past school year. There's schools that are reporting, using seclusion and restraint 5.5 times a day on average. There's 33 schools in Michigan that report using seclusion and restraint at least once a day on average. Every single one of those is an actual real child. Most of them are in elementary school. This is not just, a rare occasion. This is happening all the time. Can we switch to the next slide? There is, schools that there are provisions in the law that make it so that it's not supposed to be used multiple times on one student. This is like an emergency situation, and then a series of things are supposed to happen to prevent seclusions and restraints from happening to the same students over and over. But as you can see at Delta Schoolcraft, 58 times, that's how many each student was secluded and restrained in a single school year on average. That means some students were secluded or restrained fewer than that, but some were more. So this is not what school is supposed to be like. How are these students supposed to trust adults, let alone learn? This is a big problem in Michigan schools. Thank you.
I am a volunteer with Emergent Justice. One of the things we have been working on as a way to interrupt the school to prison pipeline is the coercive and deceptive interrogation that's happening in our schools. And one thing, so we're going to give you a little bit of information about, and I have not practiced at all. I put the slides together, haven't practiced, so spare me just a little, give me just a little grace here. When read interrogation comes out of law enforcement. And what it is it is a coercive and deceptive form of questioning that was developed by John Reed back in the mid-50s. He was involved in polygraph creation and testing, and he and his partner got together and created this way of interrogating suspects that was considered a step forward from the third degree, where they literally beat a confession out of suspects. So this was next. But what they did is they replaced physical problems, physical action with psychological manipulation. And so that is a read interrogation, and it is still one of the primary ways that law enforcement in the US are trained. Other countries, European countries, have outlawed this use of interrogation. It's still being used and trained in the US. And 10 to 15 years ago, Reed and Associates developed a course for school principals and administrators called Developing Investigative Interview Skills for School Administrators. It is basically the same class, the same course that they are teaching to principals, techniques used by the police. And it's been happening here in Michigan. And this quote was pulled from a 2016 New Yorker article. Wendy Zeeb, who was the director of the Michigan Association of Secondary School Principals, said that her group was preparing to host its 20th seminar in the past 11 years. So their 20th seminar since, that would make it what, 2005? 2016. And they continue to offer this course. And since the pandemic, it has become a virtual course as well. So they can actually teach it to more and more people. This is a course that does qualify for continuing professional development. So teachers can use that to meet those requirements. Next slide, please. So what is read interrogation? The first thing to remember is that it's called interrogation when it's law enforcement. When school principals and administrators are using it, it is questioning. I read something today where they called it high pressure questioning, but often you will hear a parent say, my child was not interrogated, but they were questioned. In school, it's called questioning. It uses deception and coercion to gain a confession, and it follows many of the techniques that law enforcement uses. So law enforcement are legally allowed to lie to whoever they're interviewing or interrogating about these kinds of things: forensic evidence, witnesses, polygraphs. They can even lie and tell the suspect that, hey, I can't lie to you. You need to believe me here. So some of this is being transferred through to school principals as ways of getting kids to quote unquote confess. One of the things that's important to remember, somebody just pointed out in the legal system, yes, it's everything that we're doing here, talking about here, is being done in the legal system on a regular basis. The coercion tactics involve psychological manipulation. And so there's two types of it. It's maximization, where it's like, oh, you've done this horrible thing, and if you don't admit to it, we're gonna like throw the book at you. In school, it can be more, expulsion is coming, or if you don't answer these questions, there's gonna be a problem. There's also what is used actually more often on the school basis is minimization, where they say things to you like, you're not in trouble, I just want to hear your side of the story. It's important for everybody to, you know, step up and say what they did. So just tell me a little bid about that. So it's a much softer way of saying it. When it happened to my niece, she walked in and they immediately said, what'd you do with the ring? She had no idea what they were talking about, but they just automatically assumed that she had taken a ring from somewhere. She had no idea what was going on. She'd been called to a vice principal's office. Fortunately, she had been in class at the time this incident happened, so she had a teacher backing her up. And she'd never been in trouble before, but that's the way the principal approached her. The moment she walked, vice principal, she walked into the room. Next slide, please.
Hey, Deb, I'm here.
Oh, okay. Jump right on in, ma'am.
Thank you, everyone. I am so sorry. I am in the midst of traveling, and my grandmother passed away, so I'm on my way to a.
You need to be on the floor. I can't be sitting on the seat.
Okay.
All right.
And all these people are messing with me about every little thing, and it's very, very racist on this train. I'm just gonna be very, very open about that. But thank you so much for dealing with me, and thank you, Deb. I really appreciate you. But now we can go into why is Reed a problem? So over the past 2 decades, research has shown the following general problems with Reed interrogation. So one of the things is its core idea of determining guilt are through verbals and nonverbal clues. And we found that this is not a good way to rate anyone, right? And its coercive and deceptive methods leads to confessions by both the guilty and the innocent. So I just want you all to picture yourself being interrogated by someone who is in power of you. You're a student. Imagine what that might feel like if you're being questioned, which is interrogation. And we'll get to more about like how administrators are trained in Reed. But we have shown, like research has shown, that juveniles are particularly likely to give false information, including false confessions, when questioned by law enforcement who use these tactics. But let's be clear that administrators, our school administrators, also use these same tactics. And they are likely to give false confessions. It's because the prefrontal cortex, the portion of the brain responsible for judgment and decision-making, is not fully developed until your mid-20s, leaving them vulnerable to these tactics. I want to share some more information about exonerees. And we got this from the National Registry of Exonerees. And this has been since 1989. There's only been 3,471 people who have been exonerated in Michigan, and 438 of these exonerations involved false confessions. 3% were 18 years old or younger at the time of the crime, and 87% were youth of color age 21 or younger at the time of the crime. So another particular group of folks are youth with learning disabilities. Next slide. Next slide, please. So youth with learning disabilities are increased in risk. 365 recorded exonerations that involved the false confession were people that had years or younger at the time, and there were 91 cases. Just imagine that these folks have learning disabilities or cognitive issues, and they're being questioned without a parent, without someone there as a support to help guide them and help explain what's going on. This must be like This is just tragic, just happening to our youth, but particularly our youth that are disabled. 30% of youth who made a false confession also had a mental or intellectual. The problem is even worse in schools, y'all. As long as law enforcement is not involved before.
Alicia, you keep breaking up.
And what that means is if they're being. Deb, I'll let you take over if I'm getting stuck.
You were having robot voice there for a while. I don't know. It must be where the train's at.
Yeah, you can go ahead and take over if you'd like, because it might be better.
Well, I was just gonna say jump in when you can, or if you know how when you turn your camera off, your signal always gets better. Do you want to talk with your camera off?
No, Deb, go ahead.
Okay. The problems that she was saying is even worse in schools. And one of that reasons is because Miranda does not apply there. We're familiar with Miranda, the rights that the law enforcement uses when they question people that you'll in situations where they're confined. But if law enforcement is not involved, it doesn't apply. So there's no right to be silent. There's no right to have an attorney. There's no right to have their parents there or even give consent before they're questioned. And no right to have a parent actually be there. So they don't have to tell them they're going to question them. They don't have to ask if they want to be there. And that's all completely legal. And there is a study out of Alabama done by the law school down there that looked at different levels of school involvement and the way courts have handled it. And actually, police have to be very involved before courts consider them even slightly involved. And the reason that's important is because of the common law doctrine of loco parentis, which is that the courts, once you drop your child off at the school is acting in your place. And so the courts have decided over and over again that a statement a student makes to a school personnel is voluntary, because in their minds, of course, a student is not under arrest, so they could just get up and leave. Tell me if any of us at any point in the school had been called into a principal's office and had thought that we could just get up and leave. No, but the schools say that students should feel safe there. And so whatever they're saying to the school principal, they would say to their parents, and therefore it can be used against them depending on, if there is any kind of disciplinary procedures, it's used in school. But if it becomes a legal legal situation, then it can also be used against them there. Next slide, please. Oh, we'll come back to our solutions at the end. I'm assuming there'll be a question and answer time down the road, so I'll stick around for that.
Oh, hi, everyone. Sorry, my contact lens just decided to jump. I'm Jen Peacock. I'm with the Michigan Center for Youth Justice, and I really appreciate you taking the time to chat tonight. So I just wanted to come on here for a moment and reflect on threading kind of all of this together. What my colleagues here have shared is that we know there are very clearly a lot of intersections when it comes to the school to prison pipeline. And I also want to hold space that each of these topics in and of itself honestly already is a pre-existing training. So we could have all gone on for hours. And so we have the full intent to continue this conversation going. I recognize we might not be able to do full justice like in this slide alone on the school to prison pipeline. But I really just wanted to kind of highlight a couple of core things from my perspective in my work that we often hear come up quite a bit, referring to those policies and practices that are pushing our kids out of classrooms and into the juvenile or the adult criminal justice system. And so the first, of course, being that police stationed inside schools is really upping that arrest rate of low-level offenses. And so many districts employ those school resource officers that are patrolling in school hallways, and many school-based arrests are actually for nonviolent offenses, particularly nonviolent behaviors. A lot of it is actually just disruptive behaviors. Of course, the lack of counselors or other mental health professionals. And then to that end, also just, I was, reflecting earlier about just kind of a sense of inadequate resources as a whole, right? It's really that lack of robust investment across different buckets when we think of our school system. really, in my opinion, is that precipice of justice involvement. When our kids don't have their needs met robustly, that's when these kind of vulnerabilities begin to kind of creep up. So our schools, it's not just mental health professionals, but it's those overcrowded classrooms. It's the lack of special education services, down to their textbooks we all know can completely lead to disengagement, dropouts as well, which again can up those likelihood of juvenile justice involvement. To what was shared earlier by the Student Advocacy Center, that over-reliance on suspensions and expulsions to address student behavior is just absolutely contributing to this drastic impact on our kids. It's pushing them farther and farther down this pipeline until they kind of find themselves within our court system. And again, that right to their due process is often denied throughout that process in particular. And then as a whole, you know, we have those really high significant disparities across our state, both in arrest rates and then also, of course, in suspension and expulsion. So in Michigan, we know that Black youth are overwhelmingly overrepresented in all parts of the juvenile justice continuum. We know that Black youth are petitioned at the court 2 times the rate as white youth. And we also know that their detention stay is 7 times longer, right? So we already know that on this particular end of the pipeline already have drastic disparities, right? And in the context of juvenile justice system, over 60% of youth in the state of Michigan in these facilities have committed a status or a misdemeanor as their most serious offense. And so for those unfamiliar, a status offense are considered crimes because of the age of the minor. So things like running away, it could be underage drinking, incorrigibility can be considered a status offense, truancy. And so that is a big percentage of who, when we're thinking about our young people, those are a strong majority of the kids we're talking about. And then of course, nationally, the data is telling us that a majority of our JJ kids, 65 to 70%, I've seen even higher numbers, have some form of disability, right? And so I also, to that end, I say nationally because in the juvenile justice system in Michigan, there's no shared database. There's no one where every county's kind of taking data differently. We do not have, data is of course one side of the story, but it is a pretty compelling thing that we folks like us and many of you on the call are really pushing for, because when we have transparency in data, it's far easier to hold people accountable for why these disparities exist. And so again, I recognize there's so much depth to this conversation, but now we're just going to I'm going to send it back to Drew and folks to kind of pivot to dig into the good stuff here.
To introduce this section then, so, you know, we talked about like these like high level overview of a lot of these issues facing our youth. Now we want to talk about some different solutions and things that you can do in the schools and that the schools can do as well. So I'll pass it over to Perry for that.
Keep it on this. You can keep it on that slide for 1 second.
Okay.
Yeah. So, hey, everybody, I'm Perry. I'm the executive director of the Student Advocacy Center, she, her, hers. I've been working on school expulsion and school discipline for more than 20 years now. And the only way we make progress on these very complicated issues is when we come together, when we work together. And so I'm really excited about tonight and to talk about what are some things that we can do together. These issues are all connected. We have lots of great people working on a lot of different things. So I hope you find a place for yourself today to move forward and take action on the issues, because we can study these all day long. The research is really clear, actually, right? But unless we are starting to hold school districts accountable to support school districts on these complex issues, we're not going to get anywhere if we're not working together. So go ahead and go to the next slide, Drew. So first, we need to really demand intention in alternatives. And so I'm going to put a link in the chat. We have developed a tool at Student Advocacy Center in collaboration with tons and tons of really smart school folks and research and trainings. It's an ongoing tool. So if you have things you want to add, feel free to email me later, but it's really a toolkit for school districts to customize and say, what are they going to do? What's their plan to do something besides just suspend and expel a kid? So the state law, we overturned zero tolerance, I believe it was 2017, 2018, right around there. And so it became state law that before you suspend a student for even one day, you must consider 7 factors. And one of those factors is an alternative to removal. Do we see school districts follow that? Not necessarily. Sometimes they don't even know what I'm talking about when we say 7 factors or lesser intervention, but as parents and caregivers, I know there's some prospective and current board members on here. We need to know this language. We need to really invest in it. And, you know, our school folks are really stressed and busy. And so they need to have plans written down. And frankly, caregivers need to know what to expect. When something happens, what would be the alternative? So to actually spend some time having those discussions. And it kind of, I'm going to be honest, and I've probably been doing this too long, and there's people on this call that have been doing this longer than me. But when people say, I don't know what to do, I'm like, what the are you talking about? You don't know what to do. There's like more than 20 years of research, really good research about what you can do. That doesn't mean it's not hard in practice. That doesn't mean public schools don't need more resources, but there's ways to hold young people accountable, and there's ways to help reduce behavior that isn't just removing it. And I'll say, I've talked to just so many kids, and if we get to know them, if we build relationships, if we ask them what's going on, there's really great ways to not have to remove them and to keep them in the classroom. And so that's really what this first bullet point is. It's really demanding that your district, asking your school board to have a policy that says every school is going to have and document and publish their lesser intervention plan. And they can use this template, they can download it and customize it to whatever they're able to do in their own school. And it helps them think about tier 1, which is sort of prevention, and then going up as the behavior gets more serious. What are the different things that they can do as an alternative to removing students? And when I say removing, I don't just mean suspending and expelling. We are seeing at an alarming rate young people being pushed unilaterally into virtual school settings with not enough support to be able to ever get to the issue of what their behavior is, or to get the support that they need to be able to be successful in school. We would really encourage you that you ask to be part of that team in your local school that's working on that. And you can ask, we don't all have unlimited capacity, unfortunately, but there might be situations where folks that are part of MEJC may be able to come and do a training to help kind of walk through this, to help brainstorm. But there's a lot of experts around the state that can help support. What's your written plan? And the districts that it doesn't happen a lot, but the districts I know that actually have spent time talking about this and having a written plan, they're much more likely, right, to not suspend. Right? If we have a plan written down, we know what we're going to do. If we don't know, and we're just like reacting in the moment, we're just going to keep kicking kids out. So that's what these demands are, to work with your local school districts around this. Can you go to the next slide? Oh, I don't know how you must have downloaded. So you're gonna have to scroll ahead to my slide, and then we can come back to the slide. Keep going. Keep going. Keep going. Yep, this one. Okay. So a big part of this, and Jen mentioned this, is having accountability around data and transparency. So this was a recommendation back when Obama was president. Him and his attorney general, like, were really passionate about the school to prison pipeline. They had a lot of leadership on this issue, and this was one of their best practice recommendations, and it makes sense, right? If we really want to understand what's going on, we need that data to be reviewed publicly so we understand for suspensions, expulsions, seclusion, and restraint. The one thing that I'll say that's quite tricky right now is that there is no requirement for data around unilateral placements or disciplinary placements into virtual school. So we have to I think we should keep asking for it. Even if you just ask how many kids are enrolled in virtual school, I promise you, not all of them asked to be there. It's been going on for like more than 10 years, but it is unbelievable to me. And I'll talk to anyone who will listen. Some of you guys know I'll just go on and on about this because I don't think we really understand how many kids, especially frankly, Black boys and kids with disabilities, are being pushed into these settings and they have no choice. In fact, the story that you just saw, Quan, he's like, well, you're going to do virtual school. You have to prove yourself that you're ever able to come back. That was his story. But so many young people, right? So really demanding that public review of data, and then demanding that your school board appoint a community accountability team that's regularly reviewing that data, that's going back to those lesser intervention plans and really working together. So you could be on that team, right? That's having recommendations at a school board meetings. This is allowing some more accountability, some transparency. I really think that is going to be the key for school districts, to have caregivers and parents join together and say, we know that suspension, expulsion, seclusion, and restraint is damaging. It is hurtful. And we know that this is complicated. We're here to support you to come up with real solutions that are going to help everyone. And not leave some kids behind because I'm uncomfortable. So those are hard conversations to have. But if you are living in a community that really cares about young people, really cares about children, all children, not just the children that comply with the rules and that are getting straight A's, right? Then this is the kind of work we have to do together.
And I absolutely, the thing that keeps just coming into my head is like the solution to all these various problems we're seeing, that they're all the same solutions, right? The root of the problem is this compliance-based punitive systems that our children are being educated within. Level systems, rewards and consequences, coercive systems that are triggering to children. And they're making schools less safe. And then when kids are triggered, we get these de-escalation techniques and, exclusionary practices. Well, those are not crisis prevention strategies. Those are crisis management strategies. We need crisis prevention strategies. So thankfully, there has been extensive research in the area of behavioral neuroscience in the past 20 years that have identified healthier, more effective ways to respond to kids in crisis. And it's like there's a wealth of information out there. Go ahead and advance to the next slide. And what we see is schools who have implemented measures to try to reduce exclusionary discipline, for example, reduce seclusion and restraint, they also see a reduction in staff injury, and they see increases in staff satisfaction rates, staff retention rates. And these are all things that are so important to our schools because we have such a problem. But also, when we can keep staff longer, we have a larger population of trained staff, right? So this problem, once we solve it together, it feeds itself, right? So go ahead and go to the next slide. There's not one particular way that works. Perry showed a whole bunch of alternatives. The keys are that adults play a bigger role than we thought. Adults are key to this behavior intervention. It's about the adults. The adults need to change the environment, and it needs to change. That's how we're going to fix this. Relationship is key because kids need to feel safe, wanted, connected. Anything that's taking the connection away, like virtual school, that's never going to work, guys. That's the wrong direction. Trauma is universal in this population, okay? It's because just living with a neurodivergent, as a neurodivergent person in a neurotypical world is traumatizing. And these kids are hypersensitive, especially if they have to use nonverbal communication because they are non-speaking or because they are not able to access language in the moment of dysregulation. So this is the model that we are presenting, that are educating our children in, is triggering to them. We need to change the system. We need to change the model. It's not a couple of bad apples out there. It's a system problem. Go ahead into the next slide. And what we've identified as, keys to equitable approaches are that they're trauma informed, they're neuroscience aligned, they're neurodiversity affirming, they're relationship based, and they're collaborative. suspension, expulsion, seclusion, restraint, these are not trauma informed. These don't belong in our schools. All right, go ahead. Thank you.
Keep going, Cassie. You're muted. Cassie,
Oh, you're still muted.
Thank you. Our very first meeting for the NSAR fall campaign is tomorrow at noon. So if you go to the website that you see on the bottom of the screen, you can join us. We are going to be meeting Fridays, every other Friday at noon, every other Tuesday at 7:30. So we'll get a chance to check your school's data, you know, help you understand how to approach your schools and learn what strategies are being used there. And, you know, join us as we try to approach the schools with highest numbers, and try to make a difference. And, you know, in the summer, we were focused in Hazel Park, and they made a plan, and they have an oversight team. And we're really kind of hoping to see some progress there, and we're moving to the next school while still keeping tabs on where they are. And I think we can do this collaboratively. So if you want to join us, please do.
Here we go. So in the context of juvenile justice, again, it can feel like a very big, overwhelming system, but I'm going to also kind of parry on the need for data, for that accountability is so important, especially when we're thinking about in the juvenile justice system context. Every county, it's kind of like we have, you can almost perceive it as over 57 different juvenile justice systems, right? Because it's all decentralized. So it's not, unlike the Department of Corrections, there is no juvenile corrections. There's no kind of it's very much county driven. So your voices as community members really matter, especially parents of young ones who may have experienced any contact from the justice system. That's really important to kind of be able to call on folks to demand that annual reporting. We, of course, are big believers in alternatives to detention. A strong number of our young folks' needs can absolutely be addressed in community. That's where they are far more successful. It is where they thrive, and it is where, truthfully, you get the best outcomes, not only for the young people, but for the community as a whole. When we keep our kids local, really wonderful and magical things can happen. And then I also wanted to flag one immediate active campaign. For one, always bopping around towns all over Michigan presenting on juvenile justice. So we have lots of different trainings that we offer. We've gone everywhere from just random folks' homes to local churches. We'll literally go anywhere you want folks to hear about juvenile justice. So always feel free to reach out to us. But one immediate campaign that we're working on is working to ensure that our kiddos across the state of Michigan have access to public defenders. Believe it or not, while it is a constitutional right, the state of Michigan has no centralized structure, standards, or funding to ensure our young people have access to the attorneys that they are constitutionally required to have. So this is an active campaign that we're working on. I'll drop a kit below, and I'll also drop the link to our newsletter on our website will pop up, and you can sign up there for newsletters to get up to date to calls to action or events and all of that good stuff, and also my email. So thank you.
Jenna just put the toolkit in the chat.
Amazing. Thank you.
Alicia, are you available right now to read this slide?
I don't know that she is if she's here. If she's not, I'll go ahead and step in again. It was an issue on there were a lot of things happening on the train as she was traveling. You know, we all know traveling's stressful anyhow, but when you're doing it for the death in a family, it makes it even more challenging. So, and I'll go through and talk about these a little bit. Alicia would be able to add a little bit more there. And please, the way MS has affected me is sometimes the thoughts in my brain don't make it to my lips. So that's why there's all of this. So just when I pause, I'll eventually get there. It drives me crazy. So legal representation, which as Ms. Peacock Oh, just talking about needing to make sure that young people have access to attorneys. We know that Michigan and some counties a few years ago had problems with even adults getting the public defenders that they needed. Juveniles are always looked at down, way down, like, oh, maybe they don't need it as much. And it's really important because one of the things we know is that even having a parent in a room without an attorney, their parents have a tendency to waive their children's rights about 83% of the time. That's just crazy. One thing I say is, even if you think your child is innocent, do not waive their rights. There's so many people that waived their rights and talked because they thought I'm innocent, and that ended up being convicted down the road. And the same thing happens with kids ending up being switched into the juvenile justice system. Educating students about their Miranda rights. It's something we would actually, we have a campaign going right now. One of the things we're looking for in a petition that we have is asking that Miranda rights be extended to students who are being questioned by school personnel. So it doesn't matter whether there is a police officer in the room or not, or SRO, that those particular rights get extended. Establishing clear guidelines about about school questioning, interrogations, the presence of a parent, use of recording devices, limitations on questioning, and other things, just to make sure that students are treated fairly and respectedly. Some bias training. We know that there is bias in the system, and it's across the system. And so some of the bias training that different school personnel may have had for dealing with educating their students, they may not have they may not just be crossing that over in their mind to the way they're handling them with discipline issues, and pointing out and making sure they understand what can happen. Mental health needs. Everything here connects. I mean, having us be this particular slide, like everything that everybody has talked about, it's all connected. So the mental health stuff that's going on that gets a student called into a principal's office. Sometimes, the fighting, things like that, making sure that there's the alternatives that everybody else has been talking about are there and can be used as a way to keep a student from being sent into the juvenile justice system. The data collection, trying to find data on interrogations, and believe me, I can dive deep into the internet. I referred to an Alabama article earlier. One of the things they did when they did two different ones, looked at discipline. They also looked at interrogations, and they were actually trying to just look at interrogations case by case in the state of Illinois. And there was not enough for them to look at in Illinois that were classified in a way that you could tell it was a school interrogation that took it. So then they started looking across the country. One thing to note, we're not against principals and school personnel questioning students. We're against the way they're being trained to do it. They need access to better training. Everything we've talked about here, better training would solve so many of these problems. The state of Illinois no longer allows their teachers to get credit for read interrogation. In 2016, a group of organizations came together and shut that down in the state of Illinois. They don't get credit. It's not offered through any of their professional development courses. And what I find interesting is Illinois is the home state to the John Reed and Associates. So if it can be done in their home state, it can be done anywhere. And what part of the people that were involved in that, a lot of the articles that were written in 2015-16 around this questioning, they actually went and attended the course and saw that it was really no different from the one being taught to law enforcement. So data collections, there should be we've talked about this over and over again, data. It paints a picture, you match that up with the stories of real life experiences, and it speaks to people's hearts. And so as Cassie was saying earlier, if we work together, if we coordinate, this is we can make movement. We have power as a group, and part of it is helping our parents understand that they're not experiencing these things in isolation and that they do have power. School board elections are coming up, making sure they understand what do they need to look at for their people on the school board that can help change what's happening in their system. I think that's all that I have in this section. So thanks very much. Yeah, we have a team. There's some links. We also have the petition and our website There's a lot of information there for people who need to want to understand more and actually see what's going on. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Deb. Yep, and to bring us home, here's some more things. We've talked about a lot of different, changes to policies and procedures and training. And a lot of what, a lot of solutions to problems in our society comes down to this, right? We need to demand more money and more funding for public schools. So I don't know if y'all knew this, but in the past Michigan public education budget, mental health funding was decreased by 90%. Does that sound wrong to y'all? That sounds pretty crazy to me personally, that would be defunded by 90%. So we want to demand that our local school districts use that 31 at-risk money for behavioral coaches and intervention specialists. We want to demand that the state invests in mental health funding. We also want to demand that the state increases money for special education. A lot of what our organization, MEJC, does is budget advocacy at the local and state levels. In the breakout room that I'm doing, and we're going to talk about that a little bit more, but figured I'd touch on that here. Another way to address some of these behavioral issues, right, is adopting a community schools framework. Now, there's nothing set in stone across the board on what a community school should look like, but some of the tenets of that include things like integrated student supports, expanded and enriched learning opportunities, active family and community engagement, and collaborative leadership and practices. And these are things that can start to, give students, a better voice within the schools and just give them more things to do that prevent some of these behavioral issues at the source, right? We want prevention, not management. Community schools are supposed to provide extensive mental health support, improve culture and climate within the schools so that all students feel safe both physically and psychologically. They enact restorative practices rather than punitive discipline. There's no cops in a community school. Yes, and they address the child's whole needs. So a lot of community schools, I visited one a couple months ago in Flint that had on-site medical and dental services. So things like that might even be a cause for child behavioral issues. And the community school would work to dismantle the school to prison pipeline. So there are many common school discipline issues that would be addressed within the community schools framework via some of these aspects of it. So that's something else we advocate for. So how do we make local demands? Connect and meet with other parents and caregivers in your district. And just note, like was said earlier in the presentation, there is power in numbers. Pick one or two priority issues that you want to work on first. So we talked about a lot of different issues within school discipline. Your school might even have some different ones, right? Picking those to work on and just start small and work your way up. Attending school board meetings to meet with the school board members, speak directly to them, and to meet other folks in your community. Yeah, Cassie Groundswell, right? We want to be doing that. You meet with those school board members and discuss your concerns, and make demands of them directly. Seriously, like these are we've offered some solutions here. You can ask them to do those things, and they might hear you out. And if they don't, that's why it's great to have that power in numbers. And then you can start to work on passing a policy or a resolution that starts to address those issues in your community. Then we also work on the statewide level. So we have a lot of organizations on this call today who do have campaigns that they're doing throughout the entire state. So if you are interested in working on that broader level there, I believe Casey put some of those links in the agenda for ways to follow up on those. I don't believe we're having our action in Lansing anymore, but stay tuned. We do have a petition around the mental health funding decrease. All right, so we are going to turn this over for the last, let's say 15 minutes of this call. A little less time than we wanted, but I think we can still get some good work done. We have 4 breakout groups here, so our experts on this call are going to be running those. So I'm going to open these up in a sec. choose the one that you think you're the most interested in doing some work around. It's okay. We can, connect you with resources if you're interested in several. Just choose the one that you want, maybe the most immediate answers on. So I'm going to open those up now. So I think what's going to be really important here now, always in these types of conversations, right, are the next steps. So taking note of what came out of those breakout rooms, what you're hearing from other folks, your answers to the questions that were asked. We do have a take action form tonight, and that'll help you kind of, put these issues into perspective for yourself, what your current capacity is, what you're really able to do. And so please fill that out. Casey just popped that in the chat before you leave tonight. We'd love to get that answer. In addition to that, we do have an evaluation form. Casey also just popped that in the chat. So we got links upon links here. Fill that out. Just let us know, what we did right, what we did wrong, what we can improve for next time. Really helps us to make these trainings better and better and more useful for you. So we can start to take a crack at these issues, right? So yeah, please take a moment to fill those out. And we'll be on for the last couple of minutes. But just wanted to say thank you so much for joining us tonight. And we will send, we'll be following up with you individually about these answers. All right, but I'm just going to say thank you. Yeah, we'll be on for the next couple of minutes to answer any questions. Please fill those out, and I'm going to stop recording.